Tom, and thanks everyone for being here bright and early. Ken and I are going to tag team this morning. I'll be talking about the nerdy stuff and he'll be talking about the newsy stuff. And when we come to Q&A, feel free to ask questions about either one. And let me just make sure that I actually know how to run this slideshow. That's the mouse. There we go. Beautiful. So, in a lot of ways, Occupy Central coverage for us was a first, and I mean that in a good way. I mean, I think it was a tremendously interesting story. It showed me a side of Hong Kong that I didn't actually think existed. You live here long enough and you think, oh, nobody cares about politics really, but you see how wrong you are. And I was especially happy in some ways with this coverage because usually a large part of my job is figuring out how the hell you can actually cover something in a bureau with two people in some remote place, and you spend most of your time thinking about logistics. How can I get cameras in? How can we get internet connection up? How can we get this out of the other thing if phone lines have been destroyed or whatever it is? This was in our backyard. It was in our largest bureau. It happened where our largest bureau in Asia was, and it enabled us to throw everything we had, so to speak, at covering this the right way. It also was a good time because we've been very active on social media platforms, we've been very active on chat and messaging apps, and there were a lot of breakthroughs for us with this coverage. I do not mean to demean the movement itself, but if I sound a little bit clinical about this, it's because I'll let Ken get into kind of the heartstring side of it, but I want to focus on what was different this time for us with covering a story. So Facebook, yes, we've been on Facebook for a long time, but we actually found that we had far more resonance this time because this was an Asia story, far more resonance and even high end. We found out how active people were on Facebook in Hong Kong and in other nearby countries who were interested in this, like Taiwan. We saw our traffic from Facebook almost triple, and we saw a lot higher engagement, a lot of sharing, and a lot of commenting on things, to a point where normally we don't really monitor Facebook that closely in terms of comments, but this time we found that what we were putting up, like this piece here, would generate conversations, and we wanted to know what people were saying, because for our digital side of coverage, we wanted to be able to offer more of what they were looking for. Also on Twitter, and I put my tweet at the top here. I did this from a search, just because I will be mentioning live streaming video later on in a couple of minutes, but I found engagement on Twitter. Normally when I put something up, I'll get about 150 to 200 engagements. Maybe that many people see it, I'll get 5 or 6 clicks. When I put this up, saying that we had live video, 10 times approximately the amount of engagement that I had prior to that. And when the Wall Street Journal would retweet that, it would drive Twitter analytics through the ceiling. It was incredible how closely watched Twitter feeds were for Occupy Central, to a point where we actually started to incorporate Twitter feeds into our live blog, which is the next thing I was going to mention. China Real Time is our vehicle for telling the story it's kind of the Wall Street Journal's take on what is going on in a country. China Real Time, of course, we use it to write about China, about Hong Kong, and about Macau and Taiwan. And in this case, this became our live blog. We were moving so much stuff on this. Traffic on this one went up about 4 times. It was incredible. Sometimes traffic from one blog post would exceed an article, which is almost unheard of. And we started to incorporate social chatter that was going on into some of the pieces we were doing. It gave us, at the lowest level, we were writing about what people were saying on these platforms. At a higher level, we were actually pulling this stuff in there to show what people had to say. It's a story made for video. We have 5 people here in Hong Kong who are video capable in our video department. And we use this a lot to do sidebars. We wanted to understand and go behind and around and underneath, and not just go out there and shoot lots of pretty footage for what was going on. I think some of the memorable pieces we had here where this piece, for example, about taxi drivers whose livelihood was affected throughout these protests because they basically couldn't get to anywhere that they wanted to go. And we actually surprisingly found a fairly even split between groups of taxi drivers who were blue and groups of taxi drivers who were yellow. And it was also kind of interesting for our camera guy and reporter Tom DeFonso to sit in a cab or sit in numerous cabs with the camera. I think it was a very interesting dynamic, and it's just a very good-looking piece. So if you have a chance, look for this Hong Kong Taxis driving the Occupy debate video. Do take a look at it. We also, not to put some gratuitous video in there, but we wanted to see, we heard that there were these pop-up events where people would bring little kids to see their first protest, and it sounds a little bit weird, but boy, it made for amazing video when you see the reaction of little children to political movements. I mean, this is their future. Live stream video. This was kind of a watershed moment for us. So we learned a lot of things. We knew that Apple Daily was streaming live, and got a few tips from Jimmy Lai. He talked to one of our we had a training session. He came and spoke there, and we grilled him a little bit about how you do live streaming video properly. He wanted to talk a lot about how you could actually make money from that, and he was making money from that, but we were more interested in how you could actually do it. And we did. It was 7 minutes from our office if you walked downstairs, and what we first did was we went out there and we tried streaming using the bandwidth from a cell phone and failed miserably because everyone else was trying to do something with bandwidth, make phone calls, send video, send whatever they were trying to do. So we went out and we invested some money. Let me show you quickly what the results of our first investment got us. Just a few seconds of this. But we bought a Teradek for our cameras and found that it was actually somewhat hard. It's a box. You plug a 4G stick into it, attach to your camera. You're able to theoretically to stream video live. It didn't quite work that way because you have the same bandwidth constraints you have on a cell phone. So, we were there, and we were channeling Vice in a lot of ways. By doing this, we would run a lot of raw video. We'd run it on our site. We'd run it on YouTube at the same time. And we would offer a little bit of color, but not play-by-play unless there was something really big happening. So we ran into some snags when things were particularly busy. This was our first Teradek, $700. And then when we saw that we were getting tremendous amounts of traffic from this, our business side said, go ahead, spend more money and crack this problem. So we went out and we got this baby, where you can stick 6 sticks in there at a very, robust. We didn't pay $4,000. We got B&H to mark the price down. But what we then found was you can't use 2 sticks from one company, 2 sticks from another, and 2 sticks from another. You end up basically stealing bandwidth by using 6 sticks from one company, from one phone company. And we overcame our bandwidth problem. We were able to stream live, but anyone else trying to make a phone call or do anything else was kind of out of luck because we were stealing all the bandwidth. And then, if this happened today, I would just send people out with their iPhone 6 Plus and Periscope. Brittany Height, our mobile editor, did this from the vigils last week around Hong Kong Island. But the point I guess I would make was, as we were covering these demonstrations, we went big, we spent a lot of money, and meanwhile technology keeps getting cheaper, faster, better, and I'm grateful for it. The next time if we had to do this again, I would say that we would probably start with this solution, not the $700 solution. And at that point, I'm going to turn this over to Ken, because we did a lot of other things digitally, but these are the things that were digital exclusive only, and everything else we did, because of Ken, was integrated. There was no just a print story anymore. I mean, Ken essentially took over coverage of everything with us, including digital. It was very seamlessly integrated. First real story where that happened for us in Asia. I'll let him talk about that.
Good morning. Adam is right. We basically geared up the whole bureau. Everyone was working on this story, especially the first couple of weeks. It was such a huge story for Hong Kong. We're lucky. We have 92 people in Hong Kong, including desk editors and graphics people and video people and reporters. And we have reporters who cover the bond market, and we have reporters who cover the currency markets. And everyone was on this story because it was huge and happening at our doorstep, and the interest globally was tremendous. So one of the things I'll explain about the journal and how we approach the coverage is the journal is known as an editor-driven paper. We have a lot of editors who think about coverage. We have editors who edit line by line, but we have a lot of editors who really think about coverage. And most other international news organizations have reporters out in the field, and we have especially in Hong Kong, a group of editors who really think about our coverage. How do we shape the coverage for a broad audience covering all these different elements of a story? And in a big story like this, we approach things two ways, a two-track approach. We cover the news very aggressively, live blogs, covering news, constant updates of stories. We had basically a 24-hour cycle. We run the Wall Street Journal here, we run Dow Jones Newswires here, and obviously the WCA.com websites. And so we're on a constant deadline, and the problem with this story was, a lot of the action tended to happen at night. And so we would be, up all night, and then, our U.S. print paper, which is the biggest paper in the U.S., would be going to press at, 6 a.m. Hong Kong time. We'd be scrambling to get our story in for the U.S. print paper while we're updating everything else. And then, by 8 o'clock in the morning, we'd start a new day. So it was pretty relentless. What we did, so this is the first day, and it is the, tear gas comes, crowds are out there, everyone is amazed. And quickly what we realized was we needed our rolling coverage, we needed some memorable pieces as we went through. Everyone was going to cover this stuff on the street. We wanted really memorable pieces. What can we say? What insights can we bring to the story that are fresh and new, and that will supplement our coverage? So one of the first stories we did, and you probably can't see the dates on these, but these are literally on the days, literally the first few days of the protest. So one of the things we knew is, yes, there's a big political element to this protest, but there's also a real economic divide in Hong Kong and a real generational divide in Hong Kong. And so we brought that out very rapidly, and we brought it out again and again in different ways. But a lot of the old generation in Hong Kong benefited hugely from the opening and growth in China. They benefited usually from the growth in real estate prices here, and the younger students, these students who are out in the street, have not benefited from that. They've come in, growth has slowed, there's not as much job opportunity here, real estate is outrageous, and so there's this divide. And so we were able to bring that out very quickly, literally in the first day or two of the protests. And that was something, okay, how can we add to this coverage? At the same time, we're out there. Our reporters are there. We had a bunch of folks got sprayed, got tear gassed, whatever, and we were literally out there 24 hours a day. We had a probably the most elaborate schedule I've ever put together, but it was a 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week schedule. So we always had someone on the street, at least for the first 2 weeks, constantly updating, constantly feeding stuff. And with Adam's help, one of the things we did, we used a lot of WhatsApp group messaging to get stuff in, because bandwidth was hard to come by, email was spotty in some places, and we could also use it for safety purposes. My biggest concern with reporters out there was they would get hurt. And I gave this lecture every day. Be careful, don't get in the middle of these things. And of course, reporters ignore you, as they usually do. But I could find people pretty quickly. I could tell where everyone was. And with email, that's impossible. And so it gave me a lot of confidence. And also, reporters could find each other. I'm here, I'm at the bridge, I'm over here, I'm by the, and that was really good to coordinate. As anyone who's ever covered crowds and protests knows, it's hard to know where you are and hard to find your colleagues, both just to communicate, but also if you were in trouble for any reason. The other thing is we could communicate with video, so reporters saw something going on, we get video people over there quickly. So using social media, the chats was good. And then, we were tweeting constantly, even tweeting just, we have a great tech reporter, this guy Jiro Osawa, who's also a very talented photographer. And so he covers Alibaba and all these tech companies, but of course he became a protest reporter then, and we threw him out there with his camera. And he would be shooting pictures and putting them out on Twitter, on Instagram, and all that. And he must have picked up, 5,000 followers on Twitter in just a couple days. And his pictures were just memorable, and he was out there doing stuff and capturing people. What else can we add to this coverage? How can we do things that are interesting? Okay, so everyone knows Joshua, right? He's been around, he did the scholasticism protests. Everyone, including us, had done profiles of Joshua going back the year before. As things started, he's an interesting character, clearly someone you want to put a face on this. Even Time Magazine put him on the cover. We did a quick profile of him at the moment for maximum impact. When will people want? Everyone in the world was reading our coverage. Let's put a public face out on this. Here's Joshua. So we did it very quickly, right on the news, capturing the moment when it was get people reading. Our former editor, who was an editor for the Wall Street Journal for about 15 years, Paul Steiger, once told me, he said, I know you've written this story before. He said, but I want to read this story now. And so we gave the readers the story now. We brought Andy Brown, is our China's World columnist. Andy Brown grew up in Shatin in Hong Kong, son of missionaries. Fluent in Cantonese, fluent in Mandarin. He was our Beijing, our China bureau chief for many years. We brought him down. So Andy is a guy who knows Hong Kong. He's effectively a native. We brought him down, and he was on the streets for the first week, writing columns, doing video. He did a very memorable video in Shatin, in the neighborhood he grew up in, which really is very far removed from the protests. One of the things we found talking to the protesters, a lot of the young people who were down in Admiralty, was they never came down to that area of Hong Kong. They lived up in New Territories, they lived in Kelly, they were rarely there. And so it was they were looking around, wow, it's pretty interesting over here. So Andy gave us a real perspective of what old Hong Kong, where the bulk of Hong Kong people lived, what the view of this was. And so he must have written 4 or 5 columns in his first week to 10 days of the protests. This was a memorable story, and we were really happy to get it out. And again, it was October 3rd, so it was within 5 days of the protest starting. One of the elements of the protest that we knew right away was there was a big Christian element to the protest leaders. Many of them, some of them were very serious Christians. There was a minister who was one of the heads of Occupy. Some of the student protest leaders, a lot of them had gone to Christian schools, which there's a tradition in Hong Kong where you got a better education at these schools. And we were able to tap into this very quickly, write about this influence and also this split, with China, with communist China. But churches had opened doors. It was a very interesting moment. And again, we did it within days of the protest starting. So it's one of these things. Everyone else wrote a story about religion in the protest in the subsequent weeks. In fact, there was memorably, someone was criticizing the press in Hong Kong for not recognizing the Christian element to the protest, and we quickly raised our hand and said, guys, we did this story a week ago. So it's very important. So again, all this was happening while our reporters were out there on the street, and a lot of this was driven by editors sitting in Hong Kong, editors sitting in New York saying, how can we add to this? How can we talk about this? Working with the reporters. The other good thing is we have enough editing firepower that I could take 3 reporters and throw them out and say, I want everything you got on Christianity. In this case, Ned, who was one of our great young reporters, pretty much did this on his own, but in some cases I would get 3 reporters, send them out and get me all you can, and we'd have an editor sitting there and do the writing, and we could get stuff out fast. And that, it just brings stuff to readers right when they want it. We also could add context to the protests, and you're writing for. We have a big audience in Asia. Obviously, we publish in multiple languages. We're blocked like most people are in China, but we're writing in Chinese too. but we're writing for, we're the biggest newspaper in the U.S., and so we're writing for that audience. They don't know any of this stuff. So we're pivoting back and forth. How can you give the readers some context for what we do? This one? Oh, so this is one of Adam's creations. That's pretty cool. So, trying new things. We literally, well, what can we do today? What can we try today? And we just threw a lot of stuff at the story. Now it's getting distracted. So I could go on. I'm really proud of the coverage we did, especially watching the staff jump in. We had one of my other favorite stories. So we did 2 stories, again, very rapidly. This is basically we got enough reporting from sources inside. So CY Long, the chief executive of Hong Kong, was basically holed up in the chief executive's house. They were ordering takeout food and trying to figure out what the heck was going on. And CY Long is not the most politically adept guy in the world, and so he's shut off pretty on a day-to-day basis anyway from what goes on outside, but he was really shut off. So we did that story, and I don't know if the slide is getting, no, the other slide is not here, but we did 2 stories. We did that story, the story that really since we basically the first weekend or right into the first week of the protest, we got 3 reporters into the headquarters of the protesters. They had taken over a floor in Ledgeco, which was right inside right next to where the protests were, and we basically spent 12 hours in the meeting rooms with the guys leading the protests, who were also trying to figure out what the heck was going on. And one of them was my bond market reporter, one of them was my hedge fund reporter, and one of them was the reporter who covered Hong Kong for me at the time. But they were in there watching these young people try to figure out what they had created. They were, sleeping on the floor, eating instant noodles, looking out the window saying, oh geez, there's tops over there, there's whatever. So, we were in there with these people, and no one else was able to duplicate that story. It's actually one of the funny things. One of our rival news organizations wrote a story the day before that said all the leaders of the protest are holed up on the 15th floor or whatever it is of Ledgeco, and they're doing this. So we basically told our reporters, get into the 15th floor of Ledgeco, and they did. And they spent, they were there for 12 hours, and they got thrown out of a couple rooms, and then they would hide in the corner, and then they kind of wander back. But it was, pretty amazing stuff, and we edited the story immediately and put it out. More context, who these players are, and I think this is back to our beginning of our coverage. Do we have? I could talk all day, but do we have questions, or are we out of time?
I think it's time for Q&A, actually.
Okay.
Let's have about 5 minutes Q&A.
And Adam too, he'll give you all the text stuff and go on and on.
Any other questions?
Hi. Can you talk about your coverage since Occupy, because you seem to have kept a closer eye on it than almost any other international type?
Yeah.
Is there much interest?
Yes, we have spent a lot of time on it. We have focused on the political developments, which have been, sort of slow and not really gone anywhere. But again, we've looked for ways to tell the story. Or earlier this year, we wrote a story that said essentially, nothing has happened. We're in a stalemate, and much of the frustration of people, and that kind of set the scene for what's been happening. And so we have, in the next few weeks, there's going to be a lot of news. I mean, this sort of cycle just started with the Tiananmen Vigil, which the students split off for various reasons. And then we have, the vote is coming up next week, and the July 1 protest. We've written about the Hong Kong economy. We just wrote a big piece about real estate in Hong Kong. We wrote a piece that ran, it was for our real estate section of all things, but we wrote a piece about the tiny, tiny apartments that are selling for lots of money in Hong Kong, mosquito apartments. and it was the best read story globally for 3 days. One of the top 5 best read stories globally for 3 days in the journal. And so that fits with, this thing. You have these, young people looking at their lives in these apartments that are the size of a parking spot.
It's also stuff that you're putting on your Twitter feed and that other people are putting on the Twitter feeds. I'm not saying we're knocking off Mashable's coverage, but we're paying a lot of attention to the groundswells. Izzy is very active. Isabella Steiger is very active on Twitter. So we want to know what's going on by looking at what's happening at street level.
Hi, I have a question about technology. So it should be like items question. So I have a question about drones. So it's a hot technology right now. So have you ever think about cooperate like drones technology into the site reporting, for example, like protests? Because I think there are a lot of like benefits from like drones because of it can save it can solve the safety issue of journalists, and also it can solve problems like shooting pictures through the crowd. But it also has some potential problem like cost and human resource. You need people like who can fly drones to the protest sites, right? However, I just want to know, like, for Wall Street Journal, it's a really resourceful press. So have you ever think about like cooperating drones in reporting protests? And is that achievable in the future? And also, will it affect journalists, their like future training or like reporting?
Yeah, no, a good question. So to date, we've used drones twice in overall coverage. We used one in 2013 to cover an architectural story outside of Nanjing, and we leased a drone. We hired a service to do it for us because we were afraid that we would ruin things. Actually, no, we've used it 3 times now. We used it once in India for a bus crash story, and again, we leased a drone, and luckily we did because the bus that went over the edge, well, the drone went over the edge too. So, and then the last time we used drones, we did a deal with DJI, the drone company from Shenzhen, to bring a drone to the Ring of Fire in Indonesia to shoot a story about sulfur miners. It's just amazing scenery. To answer your question very specifically, that was the first time that we actually flew our own drone. It was flown by this guy I mentioned before, Tom DeFonso. The issue with drones for us is Dow Jones, in addition to having lots of editors and reporters, has lots of lawyers who are very worried that we'll fly a drone and it'll drop into a crowd and it'll either kill someone or hurt someone or change a story, because we don't want to change the story. It's a bit like Star Trek, you want to kind of, you just don't want to get involved in the society, and just you want to kind of report on the story. So Tom DeFonso has taken a class. He's getting certified in flying a drone. I expect more people on our staff to get that kind of certification, which also comes with liability coverage when you get your license. But I don't think we'll become specialists in drones. I think we'll use them more. I feel more comfortable now renting out someone else's drone, though, to get the kind of assets that we need, the visual assets.
How do you do this?
Push on.
Sorry.
Takes a second.
Well, one last question. I'd like to ask whether covering it this way helps you understand the big picture quicker, because you seem to be in the lead on the economic story and the religious story, like you were pointing out. But it's basically this way of coverage, and the amount of energy you put into it, it helps you understand the story better quicker. That is just not just me.
So, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, the trick with, a story like this is the reporters are deep into the story. They're on the street, deep into the street, and talking to people, and it's hard for them to see broader stuff sometimes. And so the risk when you throw so much energy at it is you end up with tons of daily coverage and no meaning. And so a lot of times, we'll sit back. What do you think the story is? We talk through it. We send them out to, and look, some of the stories that we sent people out on never became stories because there wasn't a there. And some of it is we want the reporters to come up to us and say, I think we should do a bigger story on this. The religion story came from that. Reporters were saying, we've seen this, we're seeing this. But it's up to the editors to shape it. And so it's a balancing act. And we're pretty good at it. I mean, I helped run our coverage of the global financial crisis in the U.S. And it was a 4-year running madhouse for us. And you were doing daily stuff and then you were doing big pieces. And so you get good at that.
Well, thank you very much. Can I hand to